Chapter 21, Farmer Boy, County Fair, page 252. Early in the frosty morning, they all set out for the fair. All of them were dressed up in their Sunday clothes except Mother. She wore her second best and took an apron, for she was going to help with the church dinner. Under the back buggy seat was the box of jellies and pickles and preserves that Eliza Jane and Alice had made to show at the fair. Alice was taking her woodwork embroidery too, but Almanzo's milk-fed pumpkin had gone the day before. It was too big to go in the buggy. Almanzo had polished it carefully. Father had lifted it into the wagon and rolled it onto the soft pile of hay, and they had taken it to the fairgrounds and given it to Mr. Paddock. Mr. Paddock was in charge of such things. This morning the roads were lively with people driving to the fair, and in Malone the clouds were thicker than they had been on Independence Day. All around the fairgrounds were acres of buggies and wagons, and people were clustered like flies. Flags were flying, and the band was playing. Mother and Royal and the girls got out of the buggy at the fairgrounds, but Almanzo rode on with Father to the church sheds and helped unhitch the horses. The sheds were full, and all along the sidewalks, streams of people in their best clothes were walking to the fair, while buggies dashed up and down the streets in clouds of dust. Well, son, Father asked him, what shall we do first? I want to see the horses, Almanzo said. So Father said they would look at the horses first. The sun was high now, and the day was clear and pleasantly warm. Streams of people were pouring into the fairgrounds, and a great noise of talking and walking, and the band was playing gaily. Buggies were coming and going. Men stopped to speak to Father, and boys were everywhere. Frank went by with some of the town boys, and Almanzo and Miles Lewis and Aaron Webb, but he stayed with his father. Almanzo stayed with his father. They went slowly past the tall back of the grandstand and past the low, long church building. This was not the church, but a church kitchen and dining room at the fairgrounds. A noise of dishes and rattling pans and a clatter of women's voices came out of it. Mother and the girls were inside it somewhere. Beyond it was a row of stands and booths and tents, all gay with flags and colored pictures, and men shouting, step this way, only 10 cents, 1 dime, 1/10 part of a dollar. Oranges, oranges, sweet Florida oranges, cures all ills of man and beast. Prizes for all, prizes for all. Last call, boys, put your money down, step back, don't crowd. One stand was a forest of striped black and white canes. If you could throw a ring over a cane, the man would give it to you. There were piles of oranges and trays of gingerbread and tubs of pink lemonade. There was a man in a tailcoat and a tall shining hat who put a pea under his shell and then paid money to any man who could tell him where the pea was. I know where it is, Father, Almanzo said. Be you sure, Father asked. Yes, said Almanzo, pointing. Under that one. Well, son, we'll wait and see, Father said. Just then a man pushed through the crowd and laid down a $5 bill beside the shells. There were 3 shells. The man pointed to the same shell that Almanzo had pointed at. The man in the tall hat picked up the shell. There was no pea under it. The next instant the $5 was in the tailcoat pocket, and he was showing the pea again and putting it in another shell. Almanzo couldn't understand it. He had seen the pea under that shell, and then it wasn't there. He asked Father how the man had done it. I don't know, Almanzo, Father said, but he knows. It's his game. Never bet your money on another man's game. They went on to the stock sheds. The ground there was trodden into the deep dust by the crowd of boys and men. It was quiet there. Almanzo and Father looked for a long time at the beautiful bay and brown and chestnut Morgan horses, with their flat, slender legs and their small, neat feet. The Morgans tossed their small heads, and their eyes were soft and bright. Almanzo looked at them all carefully, and not one was a better horse than the colts Father had sold last fall. Then he and Father looked at the thoroughbreds with their longer bodies and thinner necks and slim haunches. The thoroughbreds were nervous. Their ears quivered and their eyes showed the whites. They looked faster than the Morgans, but not so steady. Beyond them were 3 speckled gray horses. Their haunches were round and hard, and their necks were thick and their legs were heavy. Long bushy hair hid their big feet. Their heads were massive, their eyes quiet and kind. Almanzo had never seen anything like them. Father said they were Belgians. They came from a country called Belgium in Europe. Belgium was next to France, and the French had brought such horses in ships to Canada. Now, Belgian horses were coming from Canada into the United States. Father admired them very much. It's David. Look at that muscle. They'd pull a barn if hitched to it. Almanzo asked him, What's the good of a horse that can pull a barn? We don't want it to pull a barn. A Morgan has muscle enough to pull a wagon, and he's fast enough to pull a buggy, too. You're right, son, Father said. He looked regretfully at the big horses and shook his head. It would be a waste to feed all that muscle, and you've got no use for it. You're right. Almanzo felt important and grown up, talking horses with his father. Beyond the Belgians, a crowd of men and boys were so thick around a stall that not even Father could see what was in it. Almanzo left Father and wiggled and squeezed between the legs until he came to the bars of the stall. Inside it were two black creatures. He had never seen anything like them. We're going to go ahead and pause right here, and we'll come on back. They were something like horses, but they were not horses. Their tails were bare, with only a bunch of hair at the tip. Their short, bristly manes stood up straight and stiff. Their ears were like rabbits' ears. Those long ears stood up above their long, gaunt faces, and while Almanzo stared, one of those creatures pointed its ears at him and stretched out its neck. Close to Almanzo's bulging eyes, its nose wrinkled and its lip curled back from the long yellow teeth. Almanzo couldn't move. Slowly the creature opened its long, fanged mouth, and out of its throat came a squawking roar. Hee-haw! Hee-haw! Almanzo yelled, and he turned, and he butted and clawed and fought his way through the crowd toward Father. The next thing he knew, he reached Father, and everybody was laughing at him. Only Father did not laugh. It's only a half-breed horse, son, Father said. The first mule he ever saw. You're not the only one that was scared either, said Father, looking around at the crowd. Almanzo felt better when he saw the colts. There were 2-year-olds and yearlings and some little colts with their mothers. Almanzo looked at them carefully, and finally he said, Father, I wish... What, son? Father said. Father, there's not a colt here that can hold a candle to Starlight. Couldn't you bring Starlight to the fair next year? Well, well, Father said, we'll see about that when next year comes. They looked at the cattle. There were fawn-colored Guernseys and Jerseys that came from islands named Guernsey and Jersey near the coast of France. They looked at the bright-eyed Devons and the gray Durhams that come from England. They looked at the young steers and the yearlings, and some of them were finer than Star and Bright. And they looked at the sturdy, powerful yoke oxen. All the time, Almanzo was thinking that if only Father would bring Starlight to the fair, Starlight would be sure to take a prize. Then they looked at the big Chester white hogs and a smoother, smaller black Berkshire hog. Almanzo's pig Lucy was a Chester white, but he decided that someday he would have a Berkshire too. They looked at the merino sheep, like Father's, and with their wrinkled short skin, and we are going to have to stop again. They looked at merino sheep like Father's, with their wrinkled skin and their soft, fine wool, and they looked at the larger Cotswold sheep, whose wool is longer but coarse. Father was satisfied with his merinos, but he would rather raise less wood of finer quality for Mother to weave. By this time, it was noon, and Almanzo had not seen his pumpkin yet, but he was hungry, so they went to dinner. The church dining room was already crowded. Every place at the long table was taken, and Eliza Jane and Alice were hurrying with the other girls who were bringing loaded plates from the kitchen. All the delicious smells made Almanzo's mouth water. Father went into the kitchen, and so did Almanzo. It was full of women, hurriedly slicing boiled hams and roasts of beef, and carving roast chickens and dishing up vegetables. Mother opened the oven of the huge cook stove and took out roasted turkey and ducks. 3 barrels stood by the wall, and long iron pipes went into them from the cauldron of water boiling on the stove. Steams puffed from every crevice of the barrels. Father pried off the cover of one of the barrels, and clouds of steam came out. Almanzo looked into the barrel, and it was full of steaming potatoes in their clean brown skins. The skins broke when the air struck them and curled back from the mealy insides. All around Almanzo were cakes and pies of every kind, and he was so hungry he could have eaten them all, but he dared not touch even a crumb. At last he and Father got places at the long table in the dining room. Everyone was merry and talking and laughing, but Almanzo simply ate. He ate ham and chicken and turkey and dressing and cranberry jelly. He ate potatoes and gravy, succotash, baked beans and boiled beans and onions, and white bread and rye engine bread and sweet pickles and jams and preserves. And then he drew a long breath and he ate pie. When he began to eat pie, he wished he had eaten nothing else. He ate a piece of pumpkin pie, a piece of custard pie, and he ate almost a piece of vinegar pie. He tried a piece of mince pie but could not finish it. He just couldn't do it. There were berry pies and cream pies and vinegar pies and raisin pies, but he could not eat any more. He was glad to sit down with Father in the grandstand. They watched the trotting horses flashing by, warming up for the races. Little puffs of dust rose in the sunshine behind the very fast sulkies. Royal was with the big boys down at the edge of the track and with the men who were betting on the races. Father said it was all right to bet on races if you wanted to. You get a run for your money, he said, but I would rather get something more substantial for mine. The grandstand filled up till people were packed in all tiers of the seats. The light sulkies were lined up in a row, and the horses tossed their heads and pawed the ground, eager to start. Almanzo was so excited he could hardly sit still. He picked the horse he thought would win, a slim, bright chestnut thoroughbred. Somebody shouted. All at once the horses were flying down the track. The crowd was one roaring yell. And then suddenly everybody was still in astonishment. An Indian was running down the track behind the sulkies. He was running as fast as the horses. Everybody began to shout, He can't do it! $2, he'll keep up! The bay! Come on, come on! $3 on the Indian! Watch that chestnut! Look at that Indian! The dust was blowing on the other side of the track. The horses were flying, stretched out above the ground. All the crowd was up on the benches yelling. Almanzo yelled and yelled. Down the tracks the horses came pounding. Come on, the bay, the bay! They flashed past too quickly to be seen. Behind came the Indian, running easily. In front of the grandstand, he leaped high in the air, turned a handspring, and stood saluting all of the people with his right hand. The grandstand shook with the noise of shouting and stamping. Even Father was shouting, Hooray, hooray! The Indian had run that mile in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, as fast as the winning horse. He was not even panting. He saluted all of the cheering people again and walked off the track. The bay horse had won. There were more races, but soon it was 3 o'clock and it was time to go home. Driving home was exciting that day because there was so much to talk about. Royal had thrown a ring over one of the black and white striped canes, and he had it. Alice had spent a nickel for peppermint candy. She broke the striped stick in two, and each had a piece to suck slowly. It seemed strange to be at home only long enough to do the chores and sleep. Early next morning, they were driving away again. There were 2 more days of fair, and we're going to go ahead and stop here on page 267 at the top because my video is about to run out. They only go for 15 minutes, and we will have a part 2, which will start at the top of page 267.